All right, I just wanted to do a little bit of a commentary on the debate that happened recently between these two individuals. The one's name is the Muslim Skeptic, and the other one is Inspiring Philosophy. That's the name of their YouTube channels. They each have about 300,000 subscribers. So recently they were on a channel that I frequently actually watch for the past 2 years or so, named Modern Day Debate, and they just had a debate about the concept of child marriage. Now, I watched the debate. It was a very good back and forth discussion. Why it is true that I do disagree with both sides on the few points they both made. More so the Christian, of course, because his points were by vast majority very laughable and preposterous. And I do agree with the Muslim skeptic on a vast majority of the points that he made. I will make a disclaimer. As far as child marriage, he's saying, oh well, little 4-year-olds and stuff like that. I definitely disagree with that. However, if we're talking about, say, humans that are like 11 to 14, who are sexually mature, who, and again, in this society, those people are called children, which is just not true. Biblically, scientifically, and historically, that is incorrect. So, when I refer to child marriage, I'm referring to a human that is, say, as an example, like 11, to 14, which are sexually mature. I'm not talking about, little, 4 or 5 year olds and shit like that, like he might be. So, I do want to give that clarification before we even get into the video, that if you do hear him make a statement, I definitely disagree with him, about talking about, actual little children like that. That's definitely going off, and that's one of the things that I disagree with him, as I said a moment ago. So, I'm going to take a couple clips from the debate, and I'm going to give some commentary on it. I'll let you listen to, them bicker back and forth for a little bit, and then I'll chime in and give my thoughts on it. And I also will say the link to the original video will be in the comment section down below. So please do go ahead and head over to Modern Day Debate and, listen to the entire discussion. I'm going to play like 40 minutes or so here today. And I'm going to start at the 15-minute mark. I'm going to skip Inspiring Philosophy's opening statements just because he gave a lot of false information in it, and I don't have 2 hours to play the entire thing, so you're gonna get to hear him a little bit later on in the video. But I'm gonna start with the Muslim skeptic, and I'm gonna start there. So about 15 minutes in.
Girls everywhere at stake. Let's see what he has to say.
All right, thank you very much for that opening, Mike. We will kick it over to Daniel for his opening statement as well. Daniel, the floor is all yours.
Excuse the ads, I don't have the ad block, so we'll have to deal with it.
For that opening, Mike, we will kick it over to Daniel for his opening statement as well. Daniel, the floor is all yours.
Just a quick disclaimer that we are debating religious doctrine, history, and ethics. Nowhere am I advocating people break the law. I strongly advise everyone to follow your local laws. Many are appalled that we're even having this debate, and those people probably have a hard time imagining how anyone could ever think that marriage to a minor is acceptable. But the reality is all people historically considered minor marriage perfectly normal. If you give me a chance, I'll explain why. The first step is to acknowledge some basic biological facts. Puberty doesn't happen overnight or at one specific age. Rather, puberty is an extended process lasting from 2 to 5 years. The start of puberty also varies. It usually begins between 8 to 13 in girls or 9 to 15 in boys. Many factors affect puberty, including race and environment. For example, black girls reach puberty a year earlier than white girls. Puberty also accelerates in stressful environments, like food shortages or absent fathers. But even in normal environments, 1% of girls have their periods by age 8 and 4% have them by age 9. This means that they have completed puberty by ages 8 or 9. Overall, children complete puberty in the 8 to 15 age range and start experiencing sexual desires. Now here's the million-dollar question. How do children deal with those desires? I want all the opponents of child marriage to give us a practical solution for all these sexually frustrated minors out there, because those hormones hit like a tsunami, creating desires that need an outlet. The outlet promoted in society today is an absolute disaster. Kids are taught sex ed as early as 9, and some experts want sex ed in kindergarten. You're barely done with primary school, and your teachers are passing out condoms and telling you to get birth control. Between 40 to 55% of high schoolers have had full sexual intercourse. If you include oral sex, the percentages are a lot higher. Many children as young as 9 or 10 engage in these sexual behaviors. Experts say we have an epidemic of sexting, for example, among minors, with 25% of teens texting each other naked pictures of themselves. Educators have responded by teaching children to practice safe sexting. Send naked pictures of yourself to other kids safely. Also included in sex ed is pornography education, because the average age a child sees hardcore porn is 10. It's just become an accepted...
Let me stop there real quick. I mean, shit, going off my own life experience, man. The first time I've watched, content like that was when I was 9 years old. So, I can confirm what he's saying there. So far, his opening statement is pretty much flawless so far. Coming up, he makes a few points that, goes off, such as he's going to say that, Isaac, when he took Rebecca as his wife, she was 3 years old. And that's clearly not true. I mean, that's totally ridiculous. And definitely one of those talking points, as I said earlier, that I disagree with from his perspective. That's clearly not true in the Bible. Was she in her early teens? Of course. It's very reasonable to suspect she was a young woman. But, not, 3 years old. I mean, that's ridiculous. So he clearly is off on that. And you'll hear him saying it in a minute. But I'll let it continue.
Fact that children watch porn, so let's just teach them how to do it safely. The shocking news recently is that they've started to teach kindergartners how to masturbate. Meanwhile, there's an epidemic of porn addiction that's destroying the mental health and well-being of generations of youth. These are today's socially acceptable outlets for childhood sexuality. Hopefully, all Muslims and Christians here agree that fornication, masturbation, and pornography are not acceptable solutions. Rather, these practices destroy the moral fabric of society and corrupt the soul. But the problem actually goes much deeper. Sadly, much of the sexual activity for minors involves sexual abuse. According to the data, 28% of American children ages 14 to 17 have suffered sexual abuse. Some of this happens in churches, but the majority happens in public schools. According to reports, the sexual abuse of students in schools is more than 100 times the abuse in churches. Researchers conclude that by 11th grade, 10% of children have been sexually abused in school. That means that in America alone, 4.5 million children are victims. And none of this includes other forms of sexualizing children, like drag queen story hour, the rise of pornographic educational material in school libraries, the sexualization of children's clothes, beauty pageants, and on and on. The point is, childhood sexual desire from puberty is an unstoppable biological force. How does one channel those desires is the question, and Western society channels it through fornication, masturbation, and porn, in the best case. And in the worst case, the sexualization and fetishization of children as young as 4. But for the vast majority of history, people of all religions and cultures had another solution. And that solution is marriage. Marriage is the healthy, wholesome outlet for the natural sexual desire that humans start experiencing at puberty. And pre-industrial religious and cultural traditions hold that marriage should be available at puberty. They don't stipulate an exact age for sex or marriage because, again, puberty is highly variable in terms of when it begins. So all religions and cultures have had this solution of marriage, but what changed? Why is minor marriage now seen as this unspeakable crime? To answer this question, let's look at the history of child marriage in the West. According to ancient Jewish norms, a man can marry and have sex with a girl as young as 3. This ruling is found in the Talmud and is based on the precedent set by the Jewish prophet Isaac, who married Rebecca when she was 3 and he was 40, as inferred from biblical passages like Genesis chapter 23 and Genesis chapter 25, verse 20. In Numbers 31, Moses commands his armies to slaughter the enemy, including all adults and male children. However, female virgin children were spared for sex, although some have argued they had to be forcefully married. Whether Old or New Testament, there are many discussions of marriage and slavery in the Bible, but there's never any mention of a minimum age for sex, because apparently this wasn't a concern for the Bible's authors. Take Exodus chapter 27, verse 7.
Yeah, I'll pause there for a second. That's a good point that he brought up, because you're going to see a little bit later on that this other cat, right, this Christian here, what's this guy, Inspiring Philosophy, there's a part where, the Muslim asks him the question, about, well, are you going to, condemn the writers of the Old Testament because they, followed and practiced the act of, what you call child marriage? And he shook his head, yeah. So it's like, wait a second. So this dude admitted that he's going to criticize and denounce the writers of the Bible, but yet he's on here trying to defend this teaching using a Bible perspective. I mean, something seems weird about that. And, the other part is like, it's like, here it is, you're a Christian trying to, come against, the Muslim in the Quran, but it's like, dude, you do know that the Bible teaches the same thing about, the topic of child marriage. Which again, I'm not referring to, little toddlers and shit. I'm talking about, what people call teens today, right? But they call them children, right? If you get married at 17, they call that child marriage, right? Anything under 18 is considered to be child marriage, right? So in the Bible, we clearly see examples of people, being married under the age of 18. So the Bible, based on that one statement alone, by, his ideology, teaches child marriage. So it would be very interesting to see him deal with that factor. That here it is, you're sitting here talking shit about the Quran. It's like, but dude, you do know that the Bible teaches the same thing. That, you can sleep with a woman once she gets her first menstrual. That's in, if you go to 1 Corinthians 7:36. It's like, you do know that, right? So it's like, by what form of logic can you sit on here and talk shit about the Quran? And by the way, because somebody would be like, oh, well, you're defending the Quran. It's like, no, I believe in the Bible, right? I base my, my teaching strictly off the Bible. I don't deal with the Quran. But I'm just simply pointing out, the logical fallacy within, this Christian's statements. That here it is, he's going to be sitting here talking shit about, the Quran. But it's like, but wait, but the Bible teaches what you would call child marriage. So it's like, why don't we address that factor? So, it's unbelievable, how this Christian, you're going to see some of his points later, right? If you watch the debate, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't seen it, you're going to hear him in a little bit. You're going to see the pure hypocrisy and the self-contradictory within the statements that this dude makes.
11, which permits a father to sell his daughter as a slave, but doesn't stipulate a minimum age. So he can sell his daughters as slaves or as sex slaves from infanthood. Interestingly, this is where the Bible and the Quran actually differ, as the Quran doesn't sanction selling children as slaves. The notion that it's acceptable to have sex with children, whether in marriage or slavery, was standard during the time of Jesus. For example, the Bible doesn't mention the specific age of Mary, but pre-modern Christians held she was quite young when she was married to Joseph and impregnated by Father God. According to the official Catholic encyclopedia, Joseph was 80 when he married Mary. She was 12 at the same time being Joseph's wife and impregnated by Father God. Now, some Christians might question the reliability of the Catholic encyclopedia, but many other sources, including archaeological evidence, prove that the common age for marriage in Judea at the time of Jesus was 13. This is significant because Jesus' views on marriage would reflect those of his era, meaning that he would have endorsed marriage and sex with minors. We cannot find a single recorded statement from Jesus raising even the slightest objection to the child marriage that was happening all around him.
That's a great point right there. I would like to point out the fact that the idea of there being such a thing as a minor, that's actually not something that's true. That's just like a social custom that, was created like within the last 100 years. But as far as, human biology, there's truly no such thing as a person being a minor. It's either a child or you're considered to be an adult. What is a child? A child is one from birth up till they hit puberty, and then an adult is a human being that is sexually mature because you're able to have offspring. I mean, it's very sensitive. The idea, and here's the problem, the idea of there being, teen or teenage, that idea came into existence in the 1900s by a psychologist named G. Stanley Hall. What's this guy? I believe his full name is Granville Stanley Hall. But if you go on Wikipedia, look up G. Stanley Hall, and you can read about this individual, right? It was with this man who basically came up with the idea that there's, a stage of life that we call adolescence. But before that, there was no such thing. You were either a child or you were considered to be an adult. So, say 300 years ago, there was no such thing as a minor or a teen. You were either a kid or you were an adult. So, taking that into consideration, it's like, of course, when you read the Bible, you're not going to see anywhere where it uses the word teen or, minor or, things like that. Because those ideas, they did not exist back in his times. So the challenge I would have to ask, to anybody who, is opposed to the topic at hand, it's like, well, yeah, what he said, the Muslim said, it's a very good point. It's like, well, where can you show in the Bible, specifically speaking of, Christ, the Messiah's teachings? It's like, where is he criticizing and denouncing the marriage of a person under the age of 18? It's like, where is that at in the Bible? And you cannot show it. You cannot show it that's in the Bible. You can't. This brings to mind one of my personal favorite scriptures, man. Was that Matthew chapter 15, verse 7 and 8? It says, "These people that draw nigh to me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they worship me, teaching the doctrine and the commandments of men." Yeah, and that's what these Christian churches do, right? They claim they believe, on God and His Son Christ, but they just honor Him with their mouth and with their lips, but their heart is far from Him. And then the last part of the verse said, what? Teaching the doctrine and the commandments of men. What's a commandment? Commandment is a law. So they go around teaching the commandments, aka the laws of man. And that's what these Christian churches do, which most of them are under a 501c3 anyway, which means that they, sign a contract with the government, that restricts certain things that they can't talk about. But in return, they get, to keep the money that they make, and, don't have to pay, tax. Right? So, it's just utterly ridiculous, some of the arguments that people would make against this. It's like, where in the Bible does it state that God determined that the age of sexual intercourse when you're allowed to engage in it is 18 or 20? It's like, where is that in the Bible? And I challenge anybody to show me that, because you can't. And I say that as a person who has read the Holy Book multiple times, cover to cover. I've never found a verse that restricts, human sexuality until they're, been alive for a certain number of years. I've never found that in the Bible. So I challenge anyone to show me that. Show me book, chapter, verse. And if you can't, well, then you can't make any type of argument. Say, for an example, the Bible says, Romans chapter 4, verse, what is that scripture? Romans 4:15, I want to say. It says, where there is no law, there is no transgression. Right? Where there is no law, there is no transgression. Say, for an example, if, if I eat chicken, but a brother doesn't eat chicken, I can't tell him, well, you're going off for not eating chicken. It's like, no, I can't tell him that, because there's no law that says that he has to eat chicken. So if he chooses to eat it or not to eat it, that's his choice. Just as an example. So with what I'm saying, it's like, well, show me in the Bible where you are prohibited from marrying a person under this arbitrary age of 18 or 21. Where is that at in the Bible? And nobody can answer that question. I'll let it continue.
Jesus has no shortage of criticism for the Pharisees and larger society, but for some reason, he doesn't condemn anyone for child marriage. In later periods, some Christians adopted flexible guidelines for marriage that they borrowed from Roman law. Roman law was somewhat unique in setting a minimum marriage age for girls at 12. This was more of a guideline rather than a strict law, because there were no legal penalties for marrying earlier. Medieval Christians in the West eventually borrowed the same rule, enshrining it in canon law. Christian women could marry at 12, but in some cases, especially among aristocrats, they married as early as 8 or 9. Those are examples from Jewish and Christian history. So why did things change? Two factors, industrialization and feminism. Let's talk about industrialization first. In pre-industrial societies, virtually everyone had to be involved with food production for sheer survival. You couldn't have freeloaders consuming calories but not helping produce calories. This meant that by necessity, all children worked in food production. This is why you don't see any kind of extended schooling for children historically. If kids are in school, they can't work to produce food. But starting in the 18th century, industrialization brought new technologies like tractors and mechanized irrigation. This meant a small part of the population could work as farmers and produce enough food for everyone. This led to the majority of the population moving from food production to manufacturing and service jobs. This caused a major social shift, because working on the farm requires no education, but jobs associated with industrialization require more education. To deal with these socioeconomic changes, Western governments gradually introduced mandatory schooling. This went hand in hand with mandatory increases in the age of consent and marriage. This was especially necessary for girls, because marriage produces children, and when people have children, they have no time for school. To prevent this, Western governments established minimum ages of consent. In 1791, the French Napoleonic Code established an age of of consent of 11. By 2007, the French age of consent was 15. Same thing in Australia, Canada, and Western Europe. In the US, as late as 1880, many states had ages of consent from 10 to 12. In Delaware, it was 7. By 1920, it ranged from 14 to 18. But many may be surprised to hear that today, 25 states don't even have a minimum age of marriage. Between 2000 and 2018, there were 300,000 documented minor marriages in the US, with some brides as young as 10. So, industrialization changed attitudes towards child marriage. Feminism did as well. Feminism aims to empower women so that they have careers and status equal to men. This means banning early marriage for girls and encouraging them to stay in school for as long as possible. The fear is that girls may lose out on a career because they got married early and had children. Feminists consider such women victims who have failed in life because they haven't achieved independence and career status equal to men. The feminist thinking was impossible in the pre-industrial era because the overwhelming majority of the populace, both males and females, had nothing resembling a career. Almost everyone did low-skill farm labor with no education. For most of history, there was nothing like career advancement, so it would have made no sense to insist that girls delay marriage to pursue career advancement. We can track the increasing Western hostility towards child marriage over time. One of the first examples is the famous 1748 work, The Spirit of Laws, by French liberal thinker Montesquieu. Montesquieu refers to child marriage as a type of domestic slavery. Montesquieu associates such marriage with hot countries in the South. This includes Muslim countries which had child marriage. So here in the mid-18th century, Montesquieu offers one of the first Western criticisms of child marriage in Muslim countries. Because of this growing liberal hostility, Western countries banned child marriage in the colonies they occupied, like India and North Africa. By the early 19th century, Western Christians magically discovered that their religion actually prohibits child marriage, despite 18 centuries of Christians engaging in it. With this new discovery, Christian missionaries traveled to these colonies and attacked...
I'll pause it there for a second. That's another good point. So far, I gotta say this, after watching this entire debate, even though there's a few points I disagree with, from the Muslim, I gotta say this, the Christian, he got his ass cut to shreds in this debate, man. And hell, there were even, other Christians in the comments who were saying, yeah, man, the Muslim, he got your ass, man, right? He cut your ass to shreds on this topic. In all fairness, he did. I mean, the Christian was a damn embarrassment. He literally, and you're going to see it later on, but he literally says, well, yeah, I'm going to criticize the Bible, right? He's asked, are you going to criticize the Bible? The dude shakes his head, yes. It's like, wait a second, what the hell? But that was a good point that, the Muslim brought up here. It's like, so here it is, Christians will go around today and say, don't have sex before 18, right? Shit, going back to church, man, when I used to be in, the youth groups, that's what they used to teach. Where they used to teach, don't have sex before 18, right? Wait till you get married. That's what they used to teach in the groups. It's like, well, where the hell is that at in the Bible? It's like book, chapter, verse on that. You can't do it because the Bible doesn't teach that. You're just saying that because that's, what you were taught when you were growing up. But he made a great point. It's like, wait, so here it is. The Christians will say, you can't get married till you're 18 today. But wait a second, 300, 400 years ago, the Christian churches, and Christian families would, have their, sons and daughters get married, say 14, 15. Right? So today it's not okay, but here it is, they were doing it, say, 400 years ago. So again, it just shows the hypocrisy.
The indigenous religions for allowing child marriage. An important case is British India, with a population that was 75% Hindu and 25% Muslim. Due partly to Christian missionaries in 1860, the British government set a minimum age of marriage of 10. This was raised to 12 in 1891. This is how liberal stigmas about child marriage were adopted by Christianity in the late 18th century and then globalized by the mid to late 19th century. This brings us to pedophilia. Pedophilia is not an ancient concept. The first documented use of the term is 1906. Pedophilia initially means a psychiatric disorder in which an adult fantasizes about or engages in sexual acts with a prepubescent child. Gradually, pedophilia came to mean any adult who has sexual interest in a person below 18, the age of consent. And of course, the age of consent is artificially set to match mandatory schooling ages. So in essence, the pedophile is someone who has graduated, who is sexually attracted to someone who hasn't graduated from whatever amount of schooling the state has mandated. Now, many will claim that child marriage causes psychological harm. It's interesting that pre-modern people understood trauma and the emotional damage that can come from certain sexual behaviors like sodomy and prostitution, but there's no evidence that anyone in pre-modernity viewed adult minor relations as traumatic. Even modern research casts doubt on the existence of psychological trauma from adult minor sexual relations. Psychologists Bruce Rind, Philip Tromovich, and Robert Wasserman have published meta-studies critically analyzing this. What they discovered is that while there can be problems in some cases, there's no inherent harm with adult minor relationships. The only harm comes from it being socially taboo in current society rather than anything objective or inherent. These psychologists received backlash, as you can imagine, and we can dive deeper into the studies later, but the point is the claim that minor marriage is bad because it objectively causes psychological harm is unproven. So it's bizarre that anyone should depict new modern norms on pedophilia as obvious or eternal invalidity. Such norms were literally inconceivable in the pre-modern period for the many reasons I've mentioned. All this is why attitudes toward child marriage have shifted historically. The burden is on my opponent to give a better explanation for why there was such a radical change in attitude starting about 300 years ago. If child marriage is this objective and universal evil, please explain why 99% of humanity throughout history was blissfully ignorant of this. This is even more of a burden for my opponent to explain because he's a Christian who believes in revelation. Why doesn't the Bible...
Yeah, let me stop there for a second. You know, this guy's making some very, very good points here, man. It's like, it's a good point because it's like, wait a second, going by one of the factors I mentioned, 20 minutes ago about how, this idea of there being, a teen or a stage of life called adolescence, that only existed for like 100 years. Hell, even hypothetically speaking, let's even just say 150 years, right? Now, what is 150 years out of the amount of time that humans have existed? Because the mainstream, narrative, they say that humans have existed on Earth for 300,000 years. Now, again, whether that's true or not, it depends on what you believe. That's the scientific teaching, is that humans been on Earth for 300,000 years. So even though I don't subscribe to that, I believe, Earth is relatively young, but let's just hypothetically use that for an example. So what is 150 years that this idea existed compared to, the 300,000 years that humans have supposedly existed? I mean, that's literally, not even 1%. And how many people have existed throughout time? Well, again, the mainstream science, they claim that there's been 100 billion people that have existed on Earth throughout all time. Today, there's 8,000 people, right? 8 billion people alive on the Earth today. But throughout all human history, they claim that there's been 100 billion who's lived. So the question that needs to be asked, are you saying that, all the hundreds of millions, billions upon billions of people who've lived throughout, the amount of time that they claim the Earth has, existed for? So you're claiming that something that all those people somehow just skipped over and didn't notice? It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So the 99% of humans that, lived who accepted this as just, something that, was natural and happened, in the world, they were all somehow wrong. But then the people today, which are like less than 1% of the, the time, they somehow got it right. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, absolutely preposterous. We'll let it continue.
The Bible condemned child marriage. The Bible condemns homosexuality, which hasn't been as commonplace historically as child marriage. Was the author of the Bible simply ignorant? Or is it more likely that the author of the Bible is fine with child marriage? That's certainly what countless Christians throughout history believed and practiced. Now I want to take things one step further. Not only do I believe that minor marriage was acceptable in the past, I also believe that it's an institution that society abandons at its own peril. The fact of the matter is, children hit puberty in the 8 to 15 age range. When puberty hits, they biologically experience strong sexual desires, and they'll express this one way or another. Either they'll express it within the safe, stable bonds of marriage, or they'll express it through masturbation, hooking up, sexting, porn use, or worse. Those are the only two options. Any country that denigrates marriage for adults will inevitably encourage sexual liberation and promiscuity for adults.
Once again, that's a good point. It's like, here it is. Remember, the Christian church, they teach, don't have sexual intercourse till you're 18. It's like, well, wait a second. Well, what do you propose that they do? Because they claim that, don't forget this. The church teaches that masturbation, that is a sin, is what they teach, right? A sin that will send your ass to hell, is what the church teaches. Which, for the record, there is no hell where people burn. And for the record, masturbation is not a sin. But going by the doctrine, right? Going by the doctrine that the church teaches, It's like, well, wait a second. If, teens, they say, can't get married because they're still children and can't have sexual intercourse with other teens because that's a sin, right? That's a sin to have sex before marriage. Well, what do you propose is the answer to that? It's like if you're saying that it's a sin for them to masturbate, a sin for them to watch, pornography, a sin for them to get married because that's child marriage. It's like, well, what do you propose that they do? I mean, you can't just restrict, human sexuality like that. And then they'll complain about, oh, well, why are they all, moody all the time, right? Always in a bad mood. It's like, of course, people that are being restricted, in every way, shape, and form are going to be, angry, depressed, and whatnot. Shit, I know for a fact I was, and shit, I knew about this stuff when I was 12 or 13, right? I could honestly say that, from my own life experience, I certainly, was responsible and mature enough to, consent to sexual intercourse, certainly by, 13, 14 years old, so why should I have been restricted from that? But, like, realistically speaking, if one could prove that they are capable of doing so, why should they be restricted from that? And as far as, the Bible goes, it's like, well, if God, wasn't okay with humans who are sexually mature engaging in sexual intercourse with one another, well, why would he allow, humans that are, say, 13, 14 years old have sexual intercourse? Have sexual desires if he didn't intend for them to engage in intercourse? And that's the question that needs to be answered, because nobody can answer that without, one, contradicting themselves, or admitting that they, don't know what they're talking about. It's very simple. So I'll let it continue.
Likewise, any country that denigrates marriage for minors will inevitably encourage sexual liberation and promiscuity for minors or children. The unprecedented degeneracy we see in society today is a direct consequence of preventing marriage for minors. Christians of all people need to wake up and see what's right in front of them. And ultimately, this is why we all need to appreciate Islam and the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In his marriage to Aisha, the mother of the believers, he has provided a timeless example of this institution, which is so desperately necessary for all societies. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump to 30 minutes. I'm going to jump to 36 minutes. Please do.
5-star phone service next to half-price phone bill? It's possible with Telemobile supercharged phone plans. Go for the 5 gig.
Child marriage.
All right, and I do want to just give the disclaimer. I do all these recordings from a phone. I don't have my own computer to edit all this. So I do have to. I do apologize for the pop-ups, but I do what I can with the abilities that I have. Please do excuse those.
Again, for all the problems I cited, I see no reason to accept this at all, given all the extensive harm it causes. So if the burden is on me, I've given the burden. I have showed how harmful it is, and it should be abolished. People in the past used to use leeches to treat all kinds of diseases. They do not treat. Okay, that does not mean we should go back to what ancient people were doing. And we now know this does not work. People used to sacrifice humans to the rain gods across the globe and hoping that it would bring the rains. We now know that does not work. Okay, so we do not do those things just because people in the past did it. Okay, with regards to the Bible not giving an age, again, I'll go to Ezekiel 16 really quickly here. For example, it talks about, God compares Jerusalem to his wife and says, and you grew up and became tall and arrived at full adornment. Your breasts were formed. Okay, again, according to the midwifery and women's health nurse practitioner, that does not happen until 17 when the breasts have been fully formed in the girl. And scholars like Robert Alter, Mark Rucker, Rolf Alexander all note this is talking about after puberty. So God is sort of setting the standard that sex or lovemaking comes a period even after puberty, because it says that God even passed by her again after the breasts had fully formed. So there's another period of waiting. And again, this is what I can see from scholars like Peter Gentry, Andrew Mine, T.M. Lemma, Stephen Wellham, David Gundel, Ralph Alexander,
I gotta stop for a second. I have a question for inspiring philosophy with that. For one, he opened up saying basically that, guys are saying the Bible doesn't give an age. And then he goes to Ezekiel 16. But what he reads doesn't give an age. So his whole argument's cut there because it doesn't tell an age that sexual intercourse is allowed out. So he's cut with that. But the point that he was going there to get is it mentioned how her breasts grew. And I'm not going to read it. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm familiar with it. Now, if you read the chapter 8, Ezekiel 16, it's the Lord comparing the nation of Israel metaphorically to a little girl growing up into a woman, right? And she became a woman when her hair grew and her breasts have grown. And the Lord took her as his own. Of course, it's parabolic language, but it's showing that God took this girl as his wife when she hit puberty. Now, the part where he went off and he was saying, oh, well what's after the breasts grew and they grow at like 17 is when they're fully grown. Well, there's a problem with that. I remember back in school, man, you had, ladies who were, 13, 14, 15 years old who were very, developed as far as, secondary sexual characteristics, more so than some people who are 20 years old, right? There's some women I actually know who are like 20, 25 years old, but they have like a plank body. They have that plank board body, right? They basically have like, the breast of like a 9-year-old. They have basically nothing's there. You've seen them before, right? So the question with that about flat-chested women is what they call them. Do they ever become women then? Because it sounds like you're basing, Ezekiel 16 to say, well, after her breast grows fully, she's a woman. But wait a second, you do know there's some women in the world who have like a flat chest, who never really, gain, bigger breasts compared to other women. So my question is a 20-year-old who is flat-chested, is she never going to become a woman because she is flat-chested then? You need to answer that. And the second question for you is, again, the fact that you have some women who are, say, 15, 16, who are more sexually developed than some women in their 20s, as far as, breast size. So why is the 16-year-old who has, bigger, size than the 20-year-old, why is the 16-year-old not a woman? If the 20-year-old looks looks less, sexually developed than the 16-year-old looks. So you're just basing it upon the number. That's all you're doing. You're not really using logic, facts or evidence to back up what you're saying. So inspiring philosophy, I challenge you to respond to the question I asked you there, because I've never seen anybody ask you that before, but that cuts you 6 ways deep, as I would say. That clearly cuts your argument to shreds on that factor. So are you saying that, a 20-year-old who is flat-chested, does she never become a woman then because she is flat-chested? If you're basing it upon, God only took her after her breasts were fully grown. Well, what about a woman who basically has a flat chest? So she, by that logic, because her breast will never, grow to the size of, some other woman. So it's like, so does she never become a woman then? That's a question that you need to answer, man.
Altar, all of them are pointing to this, and I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll kick it over to Daniel for 8 minutes as well.
So Mike here is misunderstanding the argument. He's citing some average ages from different societies, like in Rome at a certain period it was 16, in another place it was 20. My claim is not that the average age of marriage is 9 or 12 or 13. My claim is that child marriage was practiced and was acceptable in all of these societies. Yeah, in some societies the average age was higher, but it's the average, meaning that there is a proportion that are marrying even younger than those averages. Find me any society, pre-industrial society, that has a categorical prohibition of child marriage. You have failed to do that. You have claimed that Moses' commandments in the Old Testament, where he commands genocide, that was done out of anger. It wasn't from God, and in fact, Moses violated God's commands. But did Jews in the pre-modern period say this? Did Christians in the pre-modern period say this? Is this a reference to anything, or are you just making it up? Also, why not simply say other morally problematic commands by Moses, like blasphemy punishments, were not sanctioned by God? Right? There are many things that Moses commanded that you would presumably find to be problematic. So why don't you just condemn Moses? Why don't you just say that Moses was a genocidal lunatic or a dictator? Because apparently he, in disobedience to God, commanded the slaughter of male children and taking female children as sex slaves. You made a big argument about maternal morbidity for girls between ages 15, girls under 18. But the reality is that the maternal morbidity, according to the National Health Institute, from age 15 to 19 is about 1%. And that is right in line with the mortality for women in their 20s and their early 30s, which is also 1%. The maternal morbidity rate actually doubles after age 35 and spikes after age 45 and reaches as high as 70% for women over 50. So if you're really concerned about reducing the amount of mothers dying in childbirth or forming these fistulas, all of those are things that can happen after 35 and 40 at around the same rates as girls as young as 12 or 13. So are you in favor of banning women over 40 from having children? Other people are also more likely to deal with disorders affecting fertility like endometriosis or uterine fibroids, and studies show that risk of miscarriage is about 10% in your 20s and your risk goes up 53% in your 40s, as I mentioned. So this is all things that you should be in favor of banning because these are parallel to any kind of complications that happen at the puberty age. So let me see, what else did you say? You also did not respond at all to the point that I made about fornication being rampant. What you seem to mention is that you advocate abstinence. People should just control it. Teens should just control it until they're over 18, because if they marry below 18, that's child marriage, which you're against. So does abstinence work? Does anyone here think that abstinence works? Clearly not. It's something that is widely recognized as a major failure. So really you're advocating for fornication, masturbation, porn use. Are you against all of these things happening before the age of 18 or when someone is actually mature? It would seem that your position actually is in favor of those.
Right. And again, the Muslim is right again. It's like, with his position, because again, going by the statements I made 20 minutes ago about, the Christian church, they teach, teens, don't have sex, don't watch pornography. It's a sin to masturbate. Just control yourself. It's like, no, things don't work that way. I mean, human sexuality isn't just something that can be restricted like that. I mean, that's completely preposterous. So the question must be asked, if you're saying that teens shouldn't even have sexual intercourse with one another, let alone older people, but they can't even, do it with among each other, kids their age, right? Well, actually not kids, but you get what I'm saying, right? Other people their age. But this guy would consider them kids, right? This dude, inspiring philosophy, he considered them to be kids, which is clearly not true. But the point I'm getting at is, if you're against them, engaging in sexual intercourse with, those of their own age, well, what do you propose that they do with these sexual desires? If you're opposed to them getting married and opposed to them, being boyfriend and girlfriend together and, engaging in this activity, I mean, what do you propose is the solution to the problem? I mean, you can't just pretend it doesn't exist and then it goes away. I mean, if you're saying that they should just, not engage in it, I mean, that's just not how things work, man. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So what the Muslim's saying is a very valid argument. It's like, if you're saying that they shouldn't get married, well, it sounds like, you're advocating, for them to engage in watching, pornography and, sleeping around outside of marriage. I mean, by logic, you'd have to say that, because, again, if you're opposed to these humans, engaging in sexual intercourse with a partner, it's so unbelievable, the hypocrisy and the self-contradictory with this dude, this Christian here. It's absolutely ridiculous. And not only this individual, right? I don't want to pick on his ass too much, but it's Christianity in general, right? It's just pure contradictory and foolishness. But this is what you're dealing with, right? But they don't have the answers for these very basic and simple questions. I'll let it continue.
Kinds of practices begin because, again, puberty causes this huge tidal wave of hormones that create strong sexual desire, and children act on this sexual desire. What is your solution for that? That is what we need to hear from in this debate. The only, other than fornication, pornography, masturbation, the only alternative, abstinence doesn't work, the only alternative is child marriage, and that's why it's so universal. That's why it is so universally practiced. Christians of all people should understand this and should be in support of it, because, again, and then Jesus is not condemning child marriage. Why? Like, if this is such a major evil that you claim, why does he not have a clear statement? This kind of reinterpretation from Ezekiel when the breasts are fully formed, this is an argument that Christian apologists have only made in the modern period. All the authors that you cited as making this kind of argument regarding Ezekiel are in the modern period. There's no pre-modern scholar, Christian scholar, or Jewish scholar who has made this kind of claim about a minimum age implied from Ezekiel in the Bible. In fact, and even that explanation, even if that were a valid interpretation of Ezekiel, breasts do form by age, even as early as age 7. 7% of young girls have developed breasts at age 7. Are they fully developed? No, but they're developing their
Well,
breasts.
let me comment on that. I'll say this. There is something called pre-precocious puberty that happens in today's time, where a girl might start to develop a few years earlier than what is naturally supposed to happen. This could happen to multiple different factors, down to the food that they eat, to the over-sexualization of the society. All of this, put together has the possibility of bringing on, early development, a few years before when it's naturally supposed to happen, right? So there's something called pre-precocious puberty. You can look that up. But once again, the Christian, he doesn't have the answers for it. He doesn't have the answers that the Muslim is asking him for. And you'll see it. He doesn't really address nothing that he's asked. And you're going to see it in a little bit. But going back to Ezekiel 16, I'd like to point out there are a few translations that actually use the word puberty in Ezekiel 16, right? It says and I'm nearly, paraphrasing it, but it says you grew up and entered puberty, right? So among these translations, some of them even put the word in there, right, in Ezekiel the 16th chapter. But the Muslim made a good point here. It's like, well, wait, even going by your logic about, the breast being grown, it's like, well, wait a second. It's like, you do know that, girls under 18, like, say, 16, 15, 17, some of them have fully grown, secondary sexual characteristics. So even by your own logic, you're admitting that, those humans are eligible to be married because they, are fully grown in that stance. So even by your own logic, you're clearly cut.
This is puberty. So I think you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what puberty is. There are in medicine, they call them the Tanner stages. There are 5 stages of puberty. And the period actually happens at the end of the puberty process, at the 4th stage. So breasts develop, pubic hair grows, all of these secondary characteristics. The body shape changes by Tanner stage 2 and 3. By Tanner stage 4, that's when puberty happens. And once that happens, all that's left is for gaining fat. The female gains fat at that stage of puberty and grows in height. So she might get slightly larger breasts, slightly larger hips, and more fat. But the 90% of puberty has already occurred by the period. And then you have girls, 4% of girls who are gaining their period at age 4. So even that kind of far-fetched explanation from Ezekiel still would be in favor or advocating child marriage, according to your definition. Do you think that you don't develop your breast as a girl until you're 18 years old? Like, that's ridiculous. So even according to the Bible argument that you painstakingly laid out for us, that passage would be in favor or endorsing child marriage according to your definition, because you've arbitrarily set it so high at 18. Like, why? Like, you're so concerned about moral arguments. Why is 18 the line? Like, what is so special about 18 that no one in history has ever, prior to industrialization, prior to these mandatory age limits, prior to this...
Yeah, I got a comment on that. That's a fantastic point that he asked him. It's like, yeah, well, why is it this 18, right? You're basing it off of, morality. Well, wait, why is it 18? Why is 18 the cutoff point? Why is, say, for an example, why is 19 not the cutoff? Why is 21 not the cutoff? Why is 16 not the cutoff? Why is it this arbitrary number, 18? May I also mention 18 is the number 666. Very simple. 6 plus 6 equals 12. 12 plus 6 equals 18. Right, so 666. Just to put that little side note out there. But that's a great question. It's like, well, why is it 18? Right? Why is it this arbitrary number? Like, what is the difference between a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old? And the answer is, well, there is no difference. So wait, so why is the 17-year-old not an adult, but the 18-year-old is an adult? I mean, you ask him and he doesn't know. He's like, well, it's the law. Well, what is the law? The law is just, a bunch of rich people come together, write scribbles on pieces of paper, and they call that the law. That's what it is. So the law is something arbitrary that a group of, rich, powerful individuals just made up and forced upon the population. So basically what he's saying is, well, 18 is the age of consent and age of adulthood. Why is that way? Well, because the government said so. It's like, well, wait a second. Well, what if the government came out tomorrow and said that we decide the age of consent is 25 and the age of, being an adult is 25? So how do you respond to that then? They'll be like, oh, well, that's the law. So yeah, a 24-year-old, well, they're kids, right? They're children now because the U.S. government said that the age of adulthood is 25. And the only argument they have is, oh, well, that's the law. In other words, somebody made this up and told me that's what it is. So I repeat them because, I am a law-abiding citizen, right? I'm a freedom-loving American. Wait a second, how the hell could you be a freedom-loving American if you literally just believe every edict that comes down from the quote-unquote authority? Like whatever the government decides, you guys go along with and don't even question it. It's ridiculous. But again, that's a great question. It's like, why is it this 18? Like, what is so special about this arbitrary number? Why is 16 not considered to be adulthood? Why is 21 not considered to be the cutoff point? Why is it this arbitrary, made-up number? You ask him, and he doesn't know. And it's not only this dude, right? If you went up to, 1,000 people on the street and asked them the same question, asked them, well, when do you become adult? I guarantee you, 999 out of 1,000 would say, oh, well, it's 18, right? It's 18. You ask them, well, why is that exactly? You might have to give them a second to think because, they never actually thought about that before. They just said, oh, well, that's just what it is. Well, how do you know that's what it is? Oh, well, that's the law. Well, what is the law? Are you even intelligent enough to know what the law actually is? So it pisses you off to think about how retarded some people are. Like, I can say from my own personal experience, man, I'm 20 now, but there's no difference between myself today and who I was 4 years ago when I was 16. There's literally no difference. I've just been alive, for a few hundred more days, than what I was, back then. Other than that, there's no difference. I still have the same, mindset, the same, sexual attractions that I had back then, the same, beliefs that I had. So if I could have demonstrated when I was 16, that I'm capable of, being an adult, why should I have not been allowed to do that back then? Just because I'm under an arbitrary number. I mean, that seems like oppression right there. And you know what the funny thing is? Here it is. I have heard stories about, say, for example, if an older person, say in their 60s, goes to get a job, the job might reject them because, oh, well, we'll reject you because, well, you're 60. But then they'll sue him. The guy will sue him because, well, wait a second, that's age, what is it called? Discrimination, right? That's age discrimination. And they can sue him for that. So it's like, wait a second, that's hypocritical. So if a 16-year-old was to go get a job, and they say, oh, well, sorry, you're not 18, so we can't, hire you to work here. She somehow can't claim that that's, age discrimination, but somehow the 60-year-old can do it. I mean, that seems like pure hypocrisy. But again, nobody will acknowledge it because, oh, well, she's, 16, if she was 18 and they told her she couldn't work there because she was under, 30 or whatever, then, oh, yeah, well, I'll be up in arms about that. But because she's 16, it's like, oh, no, she's just an innocent child. It's like that is absolutely retarded. But this is how these dumbasses think out here, man. Like, say, for an example, bear with me a second. One thing I'd like to comment on is nobody ever stops to think about the fact that, they'll let you drive around, a few thousand-pound machine, right, a car, when you're 16. They'll let you drive it, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour on the highway, putting everyone else's life at risk. And your own life, may I also add. But somehow, right, at 16, you are mature enough and capable of driving a few thousand-pound piece of metal at, 70, 80 miles an hour, putting your life and everyone else's life at risk of death or serious injury. But somehow that same person is somehow not responsible enough to smoke cigarettes or purchase a lottery ticket. I mean, what is the logic behind that? You ask people and they don't know. They just say, oh, well, that's the law. That's the law. It's like, are you that much of a dumbass so the 16-year-old can risk their life driving down to the nearest gas station, right? Not only risk their own life, but everybody else who happens to be in the area, of them driving. But somehow, that same person who is responsible and mature enough to operate this piece of machinery, they somehow are not responsible enough to smoke cigarettes or play a lottery game. You ask people, well, what is the logic behind that? And they'd say, oh, it's just law. It's like, well, that's not a fair argument. That would be like, say, for an example, in the 1800s in the United States, slavery was legal, right? Slavery was acceptable. So go up to somebody and ask them, well, would you accept that if the law said that slavery is moral? They'd be like, oh, of course not, slavery is immoral. It's like, but wait a second, so how is it then that you'll use something, being legal or illegal to justify if it's moral or immoral, but yet you contradict yourself because I just asked about if the law states that slavery is moral, you'll claim that it's immoral. So you're claiming that the law is incorrect and is immoral. But somehow, when I bring up the statement about how the U.S. government will allow a 16-year-old to drive a vehicle, but yet that same 16-year-old is not able to purchase, cigarettes, and I say that's an unjust law, then you'll be like, oh, well, no, the law was always moral, right? The law is always how we determine what's moral and immoral. So, I mean, that's a clear contradiction. I also would like to point out the fact that, these people believe that morality can just change. One day something's okay, but the next day it's wrong. Like, say, for an example, back in 2019, you could purchase, tobacco products when you're 18. But then Trump decided to change that, right, in 2020, right? He changed it, so now you had to be 21 to purchase tobacco products. So the day before that, it was okay to purchase it 3 years before. But as soon as the clock hit midnight, now it's immoral and you have to be 3 years older. And these dumbasses actually believe that that's how we determine what is moral and immoral. I mean, how the hell can it be okay for an 18-year-old to purchase tobacco today, but tomorrow somehow it's now immoral for that person to do the exact same thing? And nobody ever thinks about that. I also would like to point out that if you go over to the UK, over there you can purchase tobacco and cigarettes at 16. Hell, I know certain friends who, smoke and actually drink alcohol too, at like 16, 17. And they turned out to be fine. So why was that immoral for them exactly? Just because they're under an arbitrary number? I mean, that just seems absolutely preposterous. And again, going back to my initial argument, it just seems absolutely hypocritical and laughable how we could say that, yeah, this person, right, at 16, they are allowed to drive a few thousand-pound car, that can literally kill multiple people in a matter of seconds. That's perfectly fine for them to do. But that same person, we have to restrict them from buying tobacco products or buying lottery cards. I mean, if that is not pure self-contradictory, I don't know what the hell is. I mean, that is just unbelievable. And these dumbasses out here actually believe that. And that's the mind-blowing part. You ask them, well, why do you believe that? They don't know. Let me give you an example. I was at Walgreens this one time, and I actually knew this guy who worked at the counter because I usually go in there to buy products or whatever I need. And this one time, there was a woman in there. You could see how elderly she was, right? It took her 10 minutes to put her purse down and get her money out to pay for the cigarette she was trying to buy. And this dude, we'll call him Ron, right? We'll call him Ron. And Ron told her that, oh, well, where's your ID at? And she didn't have it on her, so she couldn't get the tobacco products. Even though the sign on the door says we card anyone who looks under 40. It's like, shit, you could see this person's an elderly person probably in their 70s or 80s. So I call him out on it. I say, well, it's like, damn, man, that don't make sense. I mean, you see she's clearly over 40. The sign says that you card people that look under 40, but she's clearly, on her way out. inside joke. So he had to think for a second what to say because he never thought anybody would question his actions. And then he said something along the lines of, well, she could be buying it for somebody else. Right? She could be buying it for somebody else. Then I think it's like, well, wait a second. So since she can't show you her card, that leads you to the conclusion that she might be buying it for somebody else. But somehow, if she did show you her card, that somehow means she wasn't buying it for somebody else. I mean, that's the logic that he was trying to use there. It's like, wait a second, how the hell does that make sense? What logic does that make? So if she shows you her card, that proves she's buying it for herself. But if she doesn't show you it, that proves she might be buying it for another person. It's like, what the hell? What type of logic is that? Another thing I'd like to mention, a few weeks ago, actually, yeah, not too long ago, I was, walking, and, somebody stopped me and asked me, and this is back when I was like 19, right? Somebody stopped me and asked, hey man, I lost my, my wallet, I don't got it on me, something along those lines. And they asked me, can you go into the store and purchase me some alcohol products? I'll give you the money for it. I just don't have an ID on me. And I had to tell him, hey man, I'm only, like 19, I would do it for you, but unfortunately I can't buy it. So they looked at me and saw, oh yeah, well that guy, obviously is, 21, right? That guy's obviously fully grown. So it shows you that, looks can be deceiving, but, it begs the question of, well, why would it be immoral for, a 20-year-old or 18-year-old to drink alcohol? I mean, why is that immoral? And that's an entirely different video there. Hell, why is it immoral for a 16-year-old to drink alcohol? As I said earlier, I got friends who've done it. I've done it, young. I was very responsible with it. And then you have people who are in their 20s who are very irresponsible with it. So it's like, you can't just restrict every young person from these activities just because, oh, well, they're all irresponsible. It's like, well, that's not true. Just like how every 25-year-old's not irresponsible with alcohol. Some of them might be, but that doesn't mean that every single one is. So to restrict, a certain age group from something just because, a few of them do something, that doesn't seem fair. That would be like it's saying, say, for example, people who are in like their, 60s, 70s, we should restrict all of them from driving vehicles because due to health issues such as, maybe having vision problems or, other health problems, it's more typical that they might get into an accident, more frequently than a younger driver would. So that means we have to ban everybody who's over the age of 65 from driving a vehicle because it's more common for them to get into an accident than somebody who's, younger than them. That's like the same line of logic. It's like, no, that doesn't justify banning everybody who's, over the age of 65 from driving a car just because that age group is more likely to get into some type of accident due to health issues. But again, that's the same line of logic that they're using. It's like, oh, well, some people who are 16, might be irresponsible with tobacco products. So that means we got to restrict every single person from, who's 16 from, buying these products. Again, it's pure hypocrisy, but nobody ever addresses it. Nobody will ever question it. I'll let them continue.
Idea that we have to go through 12 grades before we're fully mature, before we're fully adults. Like, where does that come from? You haven't provided an explanation for that. Why there's this radical shift. My explanation is very clear. There's industrialization, there's feminism, and that is what has, over the past 300 years, created these taboos of child marriage that you can't find anyone else express. Like, isn't this bizarre to you? Like, isn't this such a big red flag that what you're describing as this kind of objective moral principle is not actually very objective or universal? Like, especially like for Christians to say this. Like, because your Bible seems to endorse it, your prophets in the Old Testament seem to endorse it, Jesus has nothing to say to condemn it. Canon law has a minimum age of marriage of 12. So are you going to condemn canon law? Are you going to condemn the church fathers? Are you going to condemn all of those? Okay, yeah, you're shaking your head, yeah. So
you saw that? I gotta go back. You saw that the dude asked him, so are you gonna, condemn the writers of the Bible? You gonna condemn them? And the dumbass literally shook his head. Yes. Let me play that again.
Canon law. Canon law has a minimum age of marriage of 12. So are you going to condemn canon law? Are you going to condemn the church fathers? Are you going to condemn all of those? Okay, yeah, you're shaking your head.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This is just unbelievable. Unbelievable, man. So once again, the Muslims making phenomenal points. I mean, this Christian's getting his ass daggered, left and right here, man. I mean, he's just brought up so many good points. The Muslim. I mean, this is absolutely a spiritual knockout here. I mean, this is painful to watch. This cremation of this Christian here, man. It's a damn shame. And this dude's on his channel now, doing videos about, how he schooled the Muslim, even though he didn't really address any information that they brought up in the debate. It's just, I can't even believe this nonsense. I can't even believe that this dude will come with some of the arguments that he came with. But yet not be prepared to deal with the response that, he would get and the challenges that would be provided to him. Like, again, the Muslim asked him a minute ago about, well, why is it 18, right? Like, you need to provide evidence for why this is like the end-all be-all. Why is 16 not the end-all be-all? Why is 20 not the end-all be-all? Why is it this arbitrary number? Well, may I also point out the fact of, well, wait a second. You consider teens to be kids, right? Well, what is a teen? You look up the word teen. It says, well, we call people who are, in their teens, we call them teens because it has the word teen in the number of their age. So then you ask him, well, teens are not adults, right? He's like, oh, yeah, well, teens are not adults. So wait a second. So why are 18 and 19-year-olds, they're considered to be adults, but they have the word teen in their age? And the entire reason, if you look it up, for why we call teens teens is because they have the word teen and the number of their age. So by a logical deduction, if there were such a thing as a teenager, well, why would an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old, why would they be considered to be an adult if they have the word teen and the number of their age? And that's the entire reason why we call teens teens. So, I mean, that one question there, he doesn't know. He can't respond to that. He probably didn't even know why teens are called teens. And I've never heard anybody before mention that point before. I'll let it continue.
Yeah, so you're repudiating your entire religious tradition. So how do you even know what the Old Testament or the New Testament is, or the Old Testament for that matter? It was passed down by these pedophiles, according to you. These reprobates that you are condemning right now, they're the ones who, are they morally capable to transmit revelation if they're pedophiles, according to you?
And time. We are going to jump into the cross-examination. This is where each speaker will get the opportunity to ask questions of the other speaker. We're going to start with Mike asking questions to Daniel, and ideally this is strictly questions. And
sustainability doesn't have to mean doing less. Sometimes it's giving more people
questions, and then strictly answers from Daniel. Mike, the floor is all yours.
Okay, Daniel, I'm not...
We'll skip this because the Muslim made a couple points here that I do disagree with. So I'm going to skip past that. As I said, overall the Muslim did it very well in this debate. However, there were a few points that he did, say some things that are going off, as I, clarified in the beginning. But again, there will be a link in the comment section to the entire debate. Highly recommend watching the entire thing.
Fornication. Yes? All right, clearly in the Bible.
Sex outside of marriage is wrong.
And it's condemned by God.
It is condemned by God.
Okay, so which scenario is more immoral? Okay, I'm going to give you two scenarios. Scenario one, a 10-year-old girl who has completed puberty gets legally married with the consent of her parents to a good believing Christian man who is 25 years old. That's scenario one. Scenario two, a 10-year-old girl has a 10-year-old boyfriend and they fornicate whenever they want. Which is more immoral?
I don't have to answer that because that's an either-or situation. I say they're both
one or
immoral.
the other. Which one is more immoral?
No, both are immoral.
Which one is more immoral?
Both are immoral, Daniel.
Okay, so fornication is happening rampantly. Do you have the same kind of feelings of that being evil and wanting to stop it? And you put that big slide about Christians are going to stand against fornication. I can also put a slide up that says Christians are going to stand against fornication that's happening rampant throughout society.
Yes, we condemn it.
Where?
I'm condemning it right now. Hear me. I'm condemning it.
So, but you didn't think that was more immoral. The child marriage scenario was not more immoral than the fornication.
We're debating child marriage, and I'm pointing out it's immoral. I can also agree fornication.
So you did not say that was more immoral. Okay, got it.
I have no reason to say one or more.
Well, according to the Bible, you do have a reason to say it, because the Bible explicitly condemns sex out of marriage, but it has nothing to say about child marriage. According to some Christian sources, Jesus' mother was either 12 or 14 when married to Joseph. When it comes to child marriage, what do you think is more likely? Option 1, Jesus held views similar to those found in the society of his time and thus had no objection to child marriage. Or option 2, Jesus held views similar to the United States in 2023 and thus viewed child marriage as very evil. Which one is more likely?
Again, I quoted scholars like Michael Satlow that argued the average age was not 13, especially in Palestine. They were
Is there
married
any
much later.
pre-modern scholar who has this opinion?
Yeah, Cyrannus of Ephesus, as I cited in my opening statement. Giles of Rome.
What did you say? Repeat what he said.
All right, I'll go to Cyrannus of Ephesus, is who you want? Let me pull up his quote here. Cyrannus of Ephesus. He says, okay, so this, within regard to the birth passage, difficult labor takes place when the uterus is either a narrow orifice or a small one or a small neck. He goes on to say, a small orifice or a small neck occurs for many reasons, for it obtains whenever women married before maturity conceive and give birth, while the uterus is not fully grown or fundus of the utera expanded.
Where's that condemnation of marrying before 18?
He is
or having sex
basically
before
going
18?
on and saying that these are problems when there's a small orifice that results in
No,
problems.
so now you're making the descriptive prescriptive error, because where is that prohibiting or speaking out or condemning child marriage?
He is
We didn't see
going-
that in that reference. So is there any other pre-modern scholar who condemns child marriage?
Again, I quoted Kim Phillips' book, Albertus Magnus.
They're not pre-modern scholars. Where is the
They were
citation?
writing in the 1300s.
Find me a quote. What is a quote from a scholar that says child marriage is wrong, not a descriptive
Okay,
statement?
you're asking me to give you exact wording, yet I can quote them basically condemning it in their own words or talking about the harms of it.
Where? Read
Same
it.
thing.
Read it for me.
Again, I quoted, for example, Kim Phillips' book. She says, Albertus Magnus stated that while the physical changes associated with puberty enable boys and girls to feel desire and enter sexual relations, the seed of both parties is either too weak or not admitted, so the weak offspring nonetheless will result. The notion that intercourse and childbearing at too early an age had deleterious effects and had great authority. However, in some views of Aristotle, translated by Giles of Rome and Rome, and then translated by John of English. She goes on to say, the knowing of women in kind and childing condemn sex before 15, for example. She quotes, again, Albertus Magnus, Giles of Rome.
Again, none of what you quoted was a condemnation of child marriage.
Listen.
Yeah, there are deleterious effects there are more likelihood of complication at that age, but you also have more complications at age 40 or 50.
There's
So
not
is that just as immoral?
The medical experts say that's not a comparison. And again,
Where? Which
I can talk about,
Which experts? You cited mortality, and you cited uterine tears. Those are just as likely at age 50.
No, they're not.
Yes, they are.
No, they're not.
I can cite you that. Well,
I can
pull
cite
up
that as
the
well.
National Health Institute, and we can show you exactly the charts that show that.
My opening statement literally had studies showing that no, it is not. It is much worse. It's 5 times more likely under the age of 15.
You compared 15 to 25. You didn't compare 15 to 50 or 45. A woman at age 45 having a child is also very highly likely to get
Okay, then they
uterine
should.
tears.
Okay, then they should probably retire at that point. What's your point? It still
But
means
your
child marriage is
argument
wrong.
implies that is as immoral as child marriage.
Having a child at that age, if it's going to cause those kind of problems, but does it cause the psychiatric problems I mentioned? Does it cause the high risk
Now
of
you're getting
divorce?
so
I
you
agree.
think- so you find it
I
would
got to
find it
interrupt.
just as immoral.
I can give you a chance to finish this question that you just started, Daniel, and I'll give Mike you a chance
Okay.
to respond. That's it.
No, I have another
Okay,
question.
I can condemn child marriage because again I gave a cumulative case from all sorts of problems it causes.
Yeah, and all the things that you
psychological
cited have holes in them.
I do
Such
have
as?
to. I have
Like
to go
there
to
is
the
no
next
pre-modern
portion.
scholar that actually condemns child marriage. All of the citations that you just read show that they're making medical descriptions. They're not condemning. They're not saying this is immoral. So you're making the same descriptive, prescriptive fallacy that you accuse me of.
I'll give you a chance to respond, Mike, as this is open dialogue time.
Okay, yeah. Again, I was going to cite the medical moral treatises on this issue, and the medical experts all agree this is harmful. So again, I'm making a evidentiary type argument where I say, look at all the evidence showing this, and again, we see this reflected in the society. Kim Phillips, again in her book Medieval Maidens, points out that there was a lot of people concerned with having children too young. She cites kings and different rulers, different barons, basically saying, please wait until my daughter is this age before the marriage is consummated. So at one point, this girl Elizabeth, she cites in her book, was married young, but her father says you cannot consummate the marriage until after 16. A king over Aragorn said you have to wait until after 18, for example. So there was this concern, and they were basically trying to up the age at that point.
At what point were they upping the age?
In the Middle Ages, medieval period.
Yeah, they settled on the age 12. That was the minimum age.
No, Kim Phillips
That's
says
in
canon law is not a good representation of that. She says canon law is a very limited understanding of what was going on. It's like today citing that in...
So cite me another example of a law that prohibited marriage.
I never said it was necessarily prohibited. I'm citing cultural aspects.
Okay,
The
so
debate
that's
is
my
not-
point.
the
It was not
debate-
prohibited.
The debate is not, did people in the Middle Ages allow child marriage? I agreed in my opening statement, yes, they did. And it was still harmful when they did. And a lot of people at the same time were like, hey, maybe we should up the age. And they were encouraging girls to wait many more years.
Yeah, but the debate is about the acceptability and the morality. So you have to explain why is 99% of humanity engaged in this grave, grave evil. Why is 1% of humanity in the modern period, magically, only within the past 300 years, suddenly discovering, oh, this is such a terrible, traumatic thing. This is so evil. There's so much harm coming from it. When you cite medical experts, for example, this is an important point, and you say that, oh, well, there is these harms that come from sexual relations with minors, at the age of puberty or right around that age of pubescence, those are likelihoods. When you say morbidity, mortality, those are likelihoods. And if you're going to pin your argument on medical harm, then there are all kinds of sexual behaviors that cause medical harm. I cited having sex or being pregnant and having children with women over 35, over 40, over 50. Those are also extremely harmful. So if we take your moral argument, all of those kinds of sexual acts and reproduction should be also outlawed and should also be considered a grave moral evil.
Yeah, that's a good point. By this Christian dude's same line of logic, if he's trying to say, oh, well, anybody under 18, should be banned, from having a child. It's like, well, wait a second. Well, by the same line of logic, should also be to say it, said the same about older people, in their 40s and 50s. So why should that not be outlawed then? So yeah, the Muslims making just another great point here.
What about sodomy? What about you should be in favor of laws that ban all of those practices?
Can I respond to two things there? For one, you said, why should we not ban it if it's harmful? And the other one was like, it's been so pervasive in cultures. Well, again, let's go to your own source, Bruce Ryan, who noted that he's got 4 pages of homosexual interaction between men and boys happening in cultures around the world for generations. Well, I could just say the same thing you. If 99% of cultures before Western, let me finish, including Islamic societies, were all okay with it, why don't we just let it go rampant again? We know it's harmful, according to Bruce Ryan.
Islamic societies did not consider sexual relations between men and boys as acceptable. They did condemn it. They considered it a grave evil.
Bruce Ryan quite quotes the silence.
It was practiced, yes, of course it was practiced. Yeah. And yeah, there was poetry about it, but that was seen as a perversion and heresy.
That's not my point.
You're ignorant about Islamic history. Islam has a complete rejection and prohibition of any kind of homosexual behavior.
Respond to some of these points.
But you're making this claim that is nonsense.
Respond.
Go ahead.
Okay, first of all, my point was not that Islam did not condemn it. I agree Islam condemned it. I quoted Bruce Ryan saying that. My point was, again, you're saying that child marriage was so pervasive, therefore, what's wrong with it? Well, again, homosexual hemophilic interaction was just as pervasive, according to your own source.
Where does it say that's more pervasive? Where does it say that was equally pervasive? Where does it say that?
He literally says this throughout his page. Look, this is
child marriage is as pervasive as...
He does not bring up child marriage.
Then what comparison are you making?
You're the one who quoted Bruce Ryan.
Yeah, in a different context, for a different purpose.
You cited it in your opening statement.
Yeah, but I didn't make that point. I'm not saying everything Bruce Ryan has ever said is correct. I'm saying this meta-study that Bruce Ryan did with others showed that the sexual act between a minor and an adult is not inherently traumatic. It doesn't inherently cause psychological trauma. Yeah, I'll read you the abstract, since this is a point of dispute.
I have the actual study. I can read from that.
Yeah, it suffices to read the abstract.
Page 7, child sexual abuse researchers have repeatedly maintained that hemophilic interactions are innately and intensely harmful for the younger person.
That's what he's disputing. That's what the study
No, that's what he's saying. It's true.
No. Look, here's what it says. Many laypersons and professionals believe that child sexual abuse causes intense harm, regardless of gender, pervasively in the general population. The authors examined this belief by reviewing 59 studies based on college samples. Meta-analyses revealed that students with this kind of child sexual abuse were, on average, slightly less well-adjusted than controls. However, this poor adjustment could not be attributed to the sexual interaction because family environment was consistently confounded with that behavior. Family environment explained considerably more adjustment variance than the actual sexual act. So what he's saying, to summarize, is that you can't isolate the sexual act. What's happening is children are getting molested, children are getting abused by their family members or in this bad environment, and that bad environment or this abusive parent, that's what's causing the slightly lower adjustment levels or the trauma. It's not the sex itself, it's not the sexual act itself, and again, Ryan is not looking at marriage. He's not looking at these kinds of relationships that have existed, again, throughout history.
You're right, he's not looking at child marriage, so I don't know why you've been citing it for 4 years, but again, he says, what he's saying in his paper is that it's not harmful to the active partner. It's not a disorder. It's not like schizophrenia. But he does say it is harmful.
Where did this study mention the active partner? The abstract I just read.
You've got to read the actual study.
Are you citing the same study?
What's your study?
It's the Tromovich, Ryan, Tromovich, and Brosserman.
Yeah. I'm citing the 1998 one?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm citing the one you cited in your Harris Sultan one. Now, the problem
Why are you debating a previous debate? Like, debate me in this debate.
You bring up stuff that your opponent has cited. That's how you prepare, Daniel. Now, the problem with that study is it's an outlier.
He brings in the opening statement. That's what you should debate.
That study you just cited is an outlier. Anna Sattler notes their findings in her book, Predators. She notes that their findings are truly an outlier, and she cites numerous other meta-analyses that have found other results. A meta-analysis of the relationship of child sexual abuse to adult psychological adjustment from 1995. The long-term sequel of childhood sexual abuse in women, a meta-analytical review from 1996. A meta-analysis of the published research on the effects of child sexual abuse, as well as the prevalence of child sexual abuse in communities and student samples. Furthermore, Ryan even says in that 1998 meta-analysis that it was actually harmful to the girls. It wasn't harmful to the boys, is his argument. And he is still an outlier. So the irony of this is, again, your own study says it is harmful to the girls. girls. Ryan is saying that in 1998.
He's saying that the harm is caused by the family environment.
He's
I
saying that
just
the
read
girls
the
report
abstract.
harm in the 1998 meta-analysis.
Yeah, and he attributes that. He does a correlation analysis, and he finds that it's more correlated with the family environment as opposed to the sexual act. That's why this study was so controversial.
I ain't nobody's baby. Get yourself a new one.
Act. That's why this study was so controversial. That's why it was one.
And an outlier.
Yeah, of course it's an outlier, because look at the stigma. Like, look at the social stigma. Like, if you want to live and die by these psychological studies, then all the psychological studies right now say that, like the dominant studies all say that if a child at age 4, a boy, feels like he's actually a girl, then he should be put on hormone blockers and perhaps even get sex change surgery. So do you...
Oh, that. Oh, man. This is one of the knockout blows that the Muslim brought up here. You know, the Christians trying to say, well, we got to go by, you know, the dominant studies, you know, when we come to our conclusions. But then Muslim brought up, it's like, well, wait a second. Right now, you know, today, you know, most of the, you know, the heads of science, right, or the popular, you know, science, you know, studies, they conclude that, you know, children at like, 4 or 3 years old, if they claim that they're the opposite gender, you know, you should accept that, right? There's nothing wrong with them. You know, in fact, hell, if they want to undergo sex change surgery at, you know, 6, 7 years old, you should let them do that. That's what, you know, the popular science doctrine is by far in the time that we're in. There's some that disagree, but by and large, you know, that's the what the scientists and science papers are saying now. So it's like, so are you going to agree with them just because that's the predominant view? And if you say no, well, then you're a hypocrite then, because you're claiming that we got to go by the dominant, you know, scientific research of the day.
Do you accept that? Do you agree that's psychological conclusion?
No, and I think there was actually research to challenge that. But again, we're
Where?
talking about child marriage.
Do you disagree that the dominant research says that
I do not agree that dominant research says that.
gender-affirming
I
care
do
is
not agree
necessary
that
for...
dominant
Okay, so you
research says
disagree.
that.
So in some cases, the dominant research can be false
Again,
and very wrong, right?
what's the evidence that's the dominant research? What studies?
Okay, so
You
you're
said
disputing
analysis.
that the dominant research today in psychology says that gender-affirming care should be provided to children as young as 4 years or 3 years old. You're denying that.
If you're doubting research, why are you even citing Bruce Ryan to begin with? Are you just cherry-picking the ones that support your view? I mean, you could just say, we can just doubt it when it's useful for us, or I'll just pick Bruce Ryan was useful.
I'm just countering the point that you made that whatever is the dominant claim about a certain topic, then we should just take that and ignore
Well, then you're
other
going
kinds of
nuclear.
factors.
You're basically
I'm not
saying
making
all
a
your research is
simplistic,
useless.
like all you're doing is caricaturing my arguments. Like, oh, Daniel says that child marriage was common, therefore it's okay. Like, that's not my argument. You're
What is
caricaturing
your
your
argument that it is okay?
My argument is a challenge to anyone who claims that it's not okay to explain why the attitudes shifted so radically. One of the reasons why the attitudes changed so radically is because of industrialization, is because of feminism. That explains the radical shift, not something inherent.
What study shows that?
Many studies. Look at
What
this.
study shows that the reason we started condemning child marriage was not because of the medical
The
experts
Anthropology
like
of Childhood by David
Yeah, I read
Lancy.
that.
Discovery and Invention in the History of Adolescence, published in the Journal of Adolescent Health. Children and Adolescents as Sexual Beings, a Historical Overview by Vern Bullough, 2004. How many more studies do you want?
Okay,
All
what
of
do
these
they
studies
say?
show that these practices were pervasive. All you did to respond to that is, oh, the average age was 22 at a certain point in Europe. Like, that's your counter.
My question was, where does the evidence, do these studies say the reason we started condemning child marriage was because of industrialism and feminism? Do they say that?
Yes.
Read them.
I cited
Because I have
Montesquieu, the first Western expression against child marriage happened in 1748 with Montesquieu.
Because again, I have medical experts saying the reason it should not be practiced is because of all the harm it causes. Mental, physical, emotional, sexual.
We talk about every single factor, and it's your arguments don't make any sense.
Like what?
Like the fact that, okay, there's some likelihood of physical harm, like 2% chance of mortality for a child at age 12 or 10. You have the same mortality rate for a woman over 40.
No, girls to ages 10
But you have no problem. You have no problem with women over 40 having sex.
No, if they're going to cause problems, and the medical experts are telling them not to have children, they should listen to the medical experts. I'm perfectly
if
consistent
there were a
with that.
taboo against the women over 40 having sex, I bet the medical experts would say, oh, look at the mortality rate is the same for 12-year-old and 40-year-old, so therefore both should be condemned.
Most
But you
women
don't see that.
are basically hitting menopause, and so they can have sex just fine in their marriage without risking that kind of thing.
Well, we're talking about women who get pregnant, so
Okay,
they haven't
well,
hit
if they're
menopause.
medical
Their risk of
experts-
mortality, the normalized risk of mortality for those women is higher than women
If
who
your
are
doctor tells them
at
not
puberty.
to, then they shouldn't. Quite simple.
Okay, but why are doctors condemning one type? Do you think it could be, why are doctors condemning one side of the spectrum? Could it be because of social stigma? Because of being illegal?
No, it's because of the medical
Because your
experts.
argument basically boils down to medical researcher, child marriage is immoral because it's illegal.
No,
That's
it's-
begging the question. We're asking, why is it illegal? Why is there a social
It
stigma?
causes severe.
Right, and that's a good question. It's like, well, realistically speaking, right? If you're saying that it's totally fine for an 18-year-old to get married, well, why would it be immoral for a 17-year-old to get married? Like you need to be able to explain that, and unfortunately, aspiring philosophy is not capable of doing that. And it's not only him, no other person out there who actually believes that is capable of, demonstrating that. All they can say is, what's the law? In other words is, well, the U.S. government said so, so that's what it is. It's like, okay, so what if the U.S. government came out tomorrow and said that slavery is moral? By your line of logic, oh, well, slavery is moral because the law states that slavery is moral. That's what it all boils down to, is, well, child marriage is wrong. Why? Well, because the U.S. government said so. Right? It's illegal to get married at 16, but totally fine to get married at 18. It's like, well, why? Doesn't that seem hypocritical? It's like, well, what is a 2 years difference? And again, it just shows the hypocrisy with these individuals.
Mental and physical harm.
Where's the evidence for that?
Did you pay attention?
The physical harm, whenever I cite, you keep repeating physical harm, and I say the same kind of physical harm occurs with women who are over a certain age. And then you hand wave that and say, oh, well, but doctors aren't talking about women over 40. Well,
Again,
why not?
If a doctor tells a woman over 40 she should not have children because it can increase her risk of death, serious
Why?
injury,
You're changing
no,
the scenario.
She should not be having a child.
Why are doctors writing so much about mortality at this bottom end of the age spectrum, but not at the top age of the age spectrum? That's what you're not explaining. I have an explanation. It's because of the social stigma.
Okay, because again, the research shows that women at this age, they're still psychologically and emotionally developing. When you force them into marriages too young, they have increased anxiety, depression, psychiatric disorders, increased risk of suicide. They're more likely to die. They can't raise children properly because they've not been educated enough. They've not been able to mentally mature enough. So again, the studies I'm citing show you have an increased risk of death for even their offspring and how they're raised up to the age of 5.
The rate of psychological maturity is also very contextual. It's very environmental. Children who are, or women at age 12-year-olds in Africa or 10-year-olds in Africa today are considered adults. Like, this category of adolescence is something that is a modern Western construct.
The research I cited was in Africa.
Yeah, I know.
Shit, I'll point out the fact that, I've seen documentaries done before, children over there, man, they gotta grow up quick compared to, us living over here in the West, man. Like, say for an example, shit, I'm 20 years old, and I don't even know how to, I don't really know nothing that has to do with vehicles, right? So I've seen videos before of, 9 or 10-year-olds, being able to strip a car down and put it back together again. And shit, I'll be over here struggling to change a damn tire, you know what I'm saying? So it boils down to, how these children were raised. Over here in the West, they're taught, just to play great games and have fun and shit. But over there, man, they gotta grow up quick, right? Over, say, in India, Africa, and nations that are third world countries.
That's that kind of stigma that's attached from the West. That is what affects these health outcomes.
Then why do they have the same problems in there? Like, what are the same problems?
What problems?
The higher rates of depression, suicide, mental disorders, psychiatric issues, they're all having these. And in fact, we also see increased risk of intimate partner violence.
Again, I need to see what those studies are, because there is such a huge bias with the UN and global liberalism that is imposing this kind of
You heard it here
ban
first,
on
folks. It's
child.
a conspirary.
Oh yeah, because liberal powers have never conspired to impose.
Oh, and shit, I forgot about this. Inspiring philosophy makes a joke later, and I'm not really paraphrasing, you'll hear it, but he's like, oh, we all know that we went to the moon, right? We all believe the moon landing happened. When I heard that, I was like, oh shit, wait a second, what the hell? This dude believes in the moon landing? I mean, shit, that's old news at this point, man. I mean, shit, the studies say that, 40% of Americans are skeptical that we landed on the moon, right? 40% either believe it was a fake altogether or believe that it, there's definitely some unanswered questions regarding the moon landing. So 40% of Americans are at least skeptical about the moon landing. And this dumbass is sitting on here saying, oh, the U.S. government took men to the moon. It's like, well, how the hell do you know that? Ridiculous.
their values on the rest of the world.
Yeah,
Right?
well,
because the liberal West never made up stories about children being abused in Afghanistan to justify bombing them
You
or
think
going to
all these-
war, invading Iraq because of the weapons of mass destruction that we know Saddam Hussein had. The West never has any kind of conspiracy theory to go and invade and bomb and colonize and take over Muslim or non-Muslim lands. Right?
So all my studies
That's
are
all
conspiracy. All my studies are conspiracy.
I cited so many studies that go directly contradictory to the things that you
What
cited.
studies did you cite mention child marriage? Modern studies on the effects of it today.
We'll read them again. The
I would like-
Anthropology of Childhood by David Lancey.
study.
Discovery and Invention in the History of Adolescence.
History?
Journal of Adolescence. Yeah, today is part of
I'm
history.
talking
the
about a study
historical
that is a-
progression. You can't get funding to show. Can you get funding to show that child marriage is a great thing?
Well, probably, yeah, outside of the U.S. in certain countries, but they all find harmful
No,
effects.
outside of the U.S., you don't have research universities. Outside of the U.S., you don't have research universities. All of the research universities in the Muslim world, for example, are funded by Western grants. So no, and they're deputized, and those universities are deputized to push UN standards, Western liberal standards.
So you think there's a massive scientific conspiracy to fund institutions around the world to show
Do you
child
think
marriage is harmful?
Do you realize that there are all kinds of research, again, that shows that gender-affirming care needs to be given to children at age 4?
Yes,
Well, I mean,
tested.
no, the dominant research shows that you need to give this gender-affirming care to children as young as 4. And increasingly, you're not going to find any studies that contradict this. Why? It's because of a conspiracy.
Two reasons. One, there is research that can test that. And one, this is a very recent thing. It's not been studied that much. Child marriage has been practiced and studied for decades. We know the effects. You're comparing apples
It's been
to oranges.
taboo. It's been taboo, and it's been illegal for centuries in the West.
Yeah, good thing, because of all the harm it causes.
No, the harm it causes is also something. It's again the same kind of thing with the harm that's caused by preventing a child from exploring his gender sexuality and gender fluidity. That's the harm that's being caused.
Again, you're comparing apples to oranges.
No, it's the same exact thing.
No.
The dominant research today says that's harmful, and those studies, like the contradictory studies that you're saying, oh no, children shouldn't be exploring their gender at age 4, those are transphobic studies, and they have to be condemned. And those professors that have those studies are being pushed out of their departments.
So you're basically saying it's wrong just to dismiss.
Do you think that's happening? Do you think that's happening or
I'm trying
not?
to ask you a question, sir.
Well, I'm
Again,
asking you a question.
again,
Do you think that's
so
the
you
case?
think
Do you think
those
there's any
studies-
pressure? Do you think there's any pressure on professors who say that gender-affirming care should not be given to kindergartners? Are they facing any pressure? Yes or no?
So you're basically saying the studies that they're arguing that this is wrong are basically being dismissed as transphobic and that's bad. You seem to be doing the same thing. You're just dismissing my studies that I said as a Western conspiracy. Why do you get to dismiss all the studies you want as a Western conspiracy, but it's bad to dismiss other studies as transphobic?
No, I'm not dismissing those studies. I'm just showing the dynamics within these kinds of departments, within universities, and what you're describing as a conspiracy. Yeah, conspiracies do happen. Things that are socially taboo, like right now there's a new social taboo that you should not prohibit children from exploring their gender fluidity. That is the dominant status quo now, increasingly. And I'm saying that the status quo is sometimes very wrong. Just like there's been a status quo because of Western dominance against child marriage, minor marriage.
The mere existence of a conspiracy.
Someone like you prefers children to fornicate to their heart's content
That's
as opposed to get
false
married.
dichotomy, sir. False dichotomy, so let's get that. You're trying to say the mere existence of a conspiracy. Like, the moon landing is a conspiracy, and we all accept the moon landing happened. I mean, we know that's nonsense to deny the moon landing. We know just because there's a mere existence of a conspiracy is not evidence the conspiracy is.
This dude, hold on a second, let's go back. This dude said, we know it's nonsense to deny that the moon landing happened. It's like, what the hell are you talking about, man? So that shows you, this dude got his mind in the damn gutter, man. And that's a damn shame, that's truly a damn shame.
Conspiracy, like, the moon landing is a conspiracy, and we all accept the moon landing happened. I mean, we know that's nonsense to deny the moon landing. We know just because there's a mere existence of a conspiracy is not evidence the conspiracy is true. You're just stating there's a conspiracy against child marriage. That doesn't make it magically the case that child marriage is okay. Just like we know the moon landing happened, right?
No, I'm just citing, because you're making a big point about how there's no studies that show the benefits of child marriage. And I'm saying, yeah, no, duh,
No,
because it's
there
something
are.
that is a stigma. It's
No,
something
there
that's
actually
illegal.
There are. If you look at the systematic reviews, there are outlier studies. So a lot of times these researchers, if you read a lot of the studies I cited, will say, yeah, there was like 15 studies that showed that child marriage correlates with intimate partner violence, and one found no correlation. So there are studies that always are outside of the outlier. For example, I could cite a meta-analysis right now on religiosity and depression. 444 studies. Okay, 6% actually show a positive correlation between religiosity and depression, but 6% is still the outlier. In these studies, in these reviews, you can find outliers. Every now and then you'll come across a researcher that'll be like, okay, so in this study we found child marriage was mentally harmful in this
So then
way.
it's a wash. But then it's a wash. Then why are you staking so much of your claim on these studies? You're acknowledging that there are outliers, and you're acknowledging that sometimes it's the outliers that are correct and the dominant status quo is incorrect.
You need to show
so
evidence
why are
incorrect.
you? My argument wasn't based on showing that there are studies that prove that this is psychologically beneficial. That wasn't my argument.
Well,
My
then why should we
argument
accept child marriage?
again was that this is childhood sexuality is a reality.
Yeah.
Your only response has been abstinence. You should just control yourself until you're 18.
Yeah.
You think, yeah, so this is a failed model. This does not work. You can't have children, teenagers with raging hormones practice abstinence. That's why we see such high levels of fornication, which according to in the cross-examination is as bad as child marriage.
I didn't say it was bad. I said they're both bad. I don't have to give them numbers or rates.
Yeah, you don't want to say which one is worse. That's
because
convenient.
Again,
That's
well,
convenient.
because I'm a virtue ethicist, and we don't do that kind of thing.
But the point is that you can't condemn fornication that's happening rampantly.
Yes, I can.
And you have no solution for that kind of for that kind of
My
behavior among
solution,
children.
again, is not putting out a kitchen in the fire by breaking the dam and flooding the neighborhood.
What
You
is
don't
the
solve a
solution?
problem with a problem.
Well, what is? Stop grandstanding and tell us the solution.
A better solution would be increased religiosity, more education, more
What
extracurricular
education?
activities.
Sex education?
Education does show that there is a better understanding of sexual activity, and it does prevent the increased sort of fornication of this, because people start making better decisions in their life.
So there's no actual evidence that shows that this works. There's no evidence that shows that abstinence is something that
No.
has reduced fornication, reduced the levels of child pregnancy
Do
or
you
teenage
think
pregnancy.
child marriages would reduce premarital sex?
Yes.
Wait, but your own study from Adam, your last debate with Naria, you cited a study from Adam.
Talk about this
Amy-
debate. Don't bring up my previous
No,
debates.
because
I'm
you're
glad
almost-
that you've watched all my debates.
I cited
but let's
a
talk about
study.
the studies in this debate.
Okay, let me cite a study then on this whole issue. Amy Adamczyk, Religion and Sexual Behavior, notes that in Islamic societies, which you cited last time, notes they have lower premarital sex. However, an earlier age at marriage does not appear to explain the relationship. So, earlier marriage did not decrease premarital sex, according to your own study that you cited last time.
She says, what about child marriage?
Okay, so I'll read you directly from. We find that ever married Hindus and Muslims are less likely to report having premarital sex than ever married Jews and Christians. And an earlier age at marriage does not appear to explain the relationship. So marrying as a child or as early marriage did not decrease premarital sex. Also, I left out important detail in a lot of the studies I cited. Child marriage correlates with an increase in STDs, cervical cancer.
But the rates are much lower
No.
in Muslim countries, yes. Adamczyk is the one who cites that.
Yes, but again, child marriages correlate
How
with
does
more
she define
STDs.
how does she define child marriage? Because the age of consent is much lower in Muslim countries, number one. And number two, no, I agree that there is an entire culture that prevents promiscuity. But marriage and chastity are encouraged in Islam. Gender roles are encouraged in Islam by law and by custom. But those things don't exist in the free liberal West, in this, the countries that are blessed by Protestant Christianity. So are you advocating the same kind of restrictions on gender mixing? Are you advocating for hijab? Are you advocating for all of these kinds of Islamic solutions to prevent the kind of child fornication that is so rampant in society?
For a 100% transparent buying experience, make it Faulkner Hyundai.
All of these kinds of Islamic solutions to prevent the kind of child fornication that is so rampant in society?
You said they didn't explain the relationship. My point is that early marriage, child marriage, did not cause a decrease in premarital sex. So you can have an Islamic society without early child marriage and still decrease it. You can have a Orthodox traditional Christian society with low premarital sex without encouraging child or minor marriage. Also, again, in the studies I cited in my opening statement, what comes up a lot is an increase in STDs among the relationships where one is a child. Typically the girl, because that's typically what happens.
Child molestation, because it's stigmatized.
STDs.
Because marriage is stigmatized, so people are diddling kids in the closet.
Child marriage. Consent.
They're consenting with each other.
They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, so what are you going to do to punish them?
Again,
In the same way that you're going to punish the 25-year-old.
Okay, 25-year-old can consent and knows what he's doing.
That 17-year-old doesn't know what sex is.
At that point, a nation has to be defined by laws, Daniel. We just can't be like, oh, well, this
But
person
you're not in
fell
favor-
mentally
you're-
mature.
you're in
Can I
favor-
finish my thought before you interrupt me? For once, maybe? So once again, we have to be a nation of laws. We cannot just have every single child go to a judge and a medical expert, get a brain exam to know. We know puberty is complete in most people by 17, so the next age we grant is 18. This is a much simpler system. Sure, it comes with trade-offs, but when you're building a political system, there's going to be trade-offs. And so we set the age of consent at 18, age of adulthood at 18, because that's when puberty is complete in almost all individuals.
Let me comment on this real quick. Well, he probably doesn't even know that, there's, what is it, about half the states in the United States have an age of consent that is like 16 or 17, right? Half of the states in America the age of consent is either 16 or 17. Look it up. You probably didn't even know that. But I wanted to comment on, he made a statement about, well, we can't have every child, go stand before a judge, to determine if they're, mature enough, for marriage or for adulthood. But I wanted to bring an idea I had, and I wrote about this in my my book. As far as like one of the solutions, for the problem, because say for an example, you might have a 16-year-old who can demonstrate that they are responsible and mature enough to handle adult life, but then you might have another 16-year-old who might be childish due to the, infantilization that they were raised in. So how do we make it fair so that the one could move on, but the other one, who demonstrates that they're, not mature enough, how do we make it to where they both, won't be put into a situation where they're not capable of, having that responsibility? I think it's a very good idea I come up with here. I call this the ID of emancipation. Now, what this is it can be a government-administered test that will test the individual about all fields and all aspects of life. And if they can pass this test, right, a person of any age can, take this test, and if they can pass it, then they will be legally, I guess we could say, emancipated from under the authority of their parents, and now they will be considered to be an adult. If you pass it at 16, well, you get your freedom at 16, right? You'll be considered an adult. If you can do it at 15, you'll get your emancipation. And what it will be is it's a test that will test the individual on all fields of life, right? All skills and knowledge that they need to be, considered an adult in modern society. And if they can pass, well, they'll be given an ID and they can use for things that they would have otherwise been restricted for. Say, for an example, if they can demonstrate they are responsible with tobacco products, they can present this ID, and it will grant them the privilege of purchasing, tobacco or alcoholic beverages if they can prove to the society they are capable of, of drinking alcohol or, purchasing such, bear with me a second, such products. Now, as far as, say, for an example, somebody who's 15 who might take the test and fail, what happens then? Well, it's very simple. They would not be given an ID. They would be held back because they've demonstrated that they are not yet responsible to take on that, that responsibility that comes with receiving this ID of emancipation. So they will be held back, until they, say, next year are allowed to take the test again. If they fail again, then they get held back. Now, why this idea is not 100% perfect, I do think it's certainly a step in the right direction from the circumstances that we as a society are in today. I think it's a very fair aspect to have. So you give these humans who believe that they are capable of entering adulthood, we give them a chance to demonstrate to society that they are capable of doing so by taking this government-administered test. If they pass it and prove that they're responsible and ready, then we should be able to give them the, wide open arms into, adulthood. There should be no reason why a responsible, mature 16-year-old shouldn't be considered as an adult until, 2 years later. Why can't they be considered an adult there and then? If they can demonstrate that they are capable, that they are actually an adult. And if they can prove that, why should society not accept them? It just doesn't make sense. So my concept here of an idea of emancipation, I think this is certainly a step in the right direction. We make sure that teens who might claim that they're responsible but might not actually be responsible, well, we determine it due to the test, right? If they fail, well, they demonstrated to society they're not yet ready, so they will not be granted that freedom. But those who have passed the test, they will be offered the this emancipation because they have demonstrated to society that they are truly responsible and capable of moving on to the next stage of life. So I think that's a very reasonable idea of how to get in the right direction. Is it perfect? No, but it's a very reasonable, idea for a step in the right direction.
Got just 2 minutes
So
left.
all I heard is a bunch of rambling, but no explanation for what kind of punishments or what kind of laws you would impose to curb fornication amongst children. You haven't given any
not what laws
No,
do
it
we
is.
do. The
It's
debate
about
is
child
child
sex
marriage.
Yeah, exactly. You're in favor of laws that ban child marriage and have very severe consequences for child marriage. But I asked you about fornication, and you said that that is immoral. You're not going to say if it's more or less immoral than child marriage, by the way. But I'm asking you what kind of laws would be parallel to prohibit fornication and curb that problem.
Okay, I think adultery is wrong, but I don't think it should be illegal because.
Then why is child marriage? Why do you think child marriage should be illegal?
Because you're harming a child, as I explained in my opening statement.
Are two children fornicating harming each other?
Yes, they are, but they don't know what they're doing because they can't consent.
So how do you curb that? How do you create a stigma about that? How do
30
you
seconds.
make it illegal?
How do we make it illegal?
You want to have a
We teach this wrong.
laissez-faire attitude about fornication.
You keep wanting to
but you
debate
want the
about
hammer
sex
of the
and not
law.
actually what child
You want the
marriage is.
hammer of the law for child marriage, but fornication is something that it's unfortunate, but these are kids. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, kids do.
Wait a second. I was just drinking some water. I had to respond to something I heard him say a second ago. He said, well, two kids couldn't consent together because they don't know what they're doing. It's like, you do know, even going by your belief in government, right, with their legislation they have set up, you do know that they allow, say, for an example, two 13-year-olds to have sex with each other or two 14-year-olds to have sexual intercourse with each other. You know they allow that, right? So even your own God, right, which is the U.S. government, right, because if you believe in government, you believe in a religion, but that's an entirely different video. But even going by that, they say that they can consent with each other. So this guy just clearly is delusional and don't even know what he's talking about. Even by his own worldviews, he's clearly incorrect. This is just laughable.
That's inconsistent. That's
kids don't know what they're doing. That's the way kids typically are, and that's why we
Kids
help
know what
train
sex
them, grow
is.
them up.
Kids know-
Rehabilitation is much better for this
Kids
kind of thing.
we have
than
to
throwing them
move-
in prison like they're adults or like they're committed murder or
Gentlemen,
something.
we have to move into the 5-minute closing statements. We'll start with Mike. These are closing statements, folks, so if you have a question, get ready in 10 minutes. We'll start the Q&A. Closing statements, folks, so if you have a question, get ready in 10 minutes. We'll start the Q&A. Mike, I've got it set for 5 minutes. The floor is all yours.
Okay, so it appears that we have seen no evidence that child marriage is moral or should be permissible by any standard. Everything we've just heard tonight as well, I've seen people in the past do it. A lot of people in the past did it, therefore it should be okay. That was most of the evidence of what I've seen him give. I've seen no evidence to say that it should be allowed based on any data. Once again, child marriage leads to all sorts of harmful things. Leads to all sorts of psychiatric problems for these girls. They develop depression, isolation, anxiety, loss of identity. They develop all sorts of psychiatric issues that stay with them for life when they're forced in these situations. They also increase the likelihood of divorce because while your brain is developing, you're becoming someone new constantly until you're about 25 or so. This is why we see divorce rates stagger, basically drop to their lowest level between the ages of 25 and 30. Prior to that, they slowly increase back up. And when you're in your teens, you're very likely to get divorced if you marry that point. If we actually want to favor decreasing divorce, we should be outlawing child marriage because the data is quite clear on this, and it's across the cultures. We also see evidence that child marriages lead to all sorts of physical problems. Daniel tried to argue that, women over 40 have these issues as well. Again, if you go to a doctor over 40 and the doctor says, hey, you probably shouldn't have any more children, you could have some serious issues, then you probably shouldn't have a child. All right, that's quite that simple. I can be consistent and disagree with that. The difference is when you're under these ages, it is quite clear that you also have all these psychiatric issues. Your pelvic bones have not reached the point where you're good at delivering children. And even early medical writers like Seranus of Ephesus noted this. Okay, child marriage is extremely harmful mentally, emotionally, and physically for these girls. There's a reason why we're outlawing it. It's not some vast conspiracy. Okay? It's because medical experts routinely, country after country, come out and say, this is harmful. We've conducted studies and interviews and psychiatric evaluations of these girls in India, Africa, Southeast Asia, throughout the Middle East. This always leads to harms, one way or another. There are outlier studies, no doubt. So if there was some vast conspiracy, why are there outlier studies? Okay, Christianity is vehemently opposed to the practice of child marriage. He brought up the fact that Jesus never condemned it. Well, Jesus never condemned boiling cats. Okay, but we can still arrive at the conclusion that's probably wrong. Christianity is not like Islam. It lays down principles for us to be guided by. It doesn't have to give us an entire list of every do and don't. Okay, Bible is clear. The way you fulfill the law is by loving one another. Okay, we now know from the day that child marriage is harmful. So guess what? It's wrong. And a Muslim should know about the fallacy of presentism. Just because people in the past may not have known how harmful it was, Okay? Just like they didn't know that using leeches to try to cure diseases was wrong, does not mean we necessarily condemn them. We can still say it was wrong, they just had a lack of information. Christianity, according to experts like Robert Woodbury, Tom Holland, Rodney Stark, is responsible for a ton of scientific, moral progress that has led us into the future. It's constantly saying, let's study the science, find out what's best for society. Okay, for some reason, when I'm debating Muslim apologists, they want to drag us back to the 7th century and leave us with the ethics there. Christianity wants to take us into the future, Islam wants to take us into the past. Now, I can agree, there are a lot of harmful things about modern Western secular society. But we do not solve a problem with a worse problem. We're not going to replace the liberal dystopia we're in with Handmaid's Tale, Islam style. That would just be a worse or equally bad dystopia. Child marriage is harmful. And trying to solve problems in society, like kids sometimes fool around with each other, by instituting something we know to be intently and innately harmful, according to every expert, then that's not the solution. That would just be another problem we have to deal with. It's quite clear, we have seen no evidence that child marriage increases virtue, helps young girls to flourish. It leads to all types of harm, all types of issues that ruin these girls for life. Any educated society will outlaw child marriages if you care about your population. You're not going to install a Handmaid's Tale dystopia where children are forced into these marriages, suffer from psychiatric problems, which they then pass on to their children. Because the evidence, once again, as I cited, shows that they lead to complications when raising their own children. There's a reason why every medical expert agrees with me up here, and not with Daniel. The evidence is abundantly clear. And I barely scratched the surface. There are dozens of other studies I could have studied, but I don't have the time.
I want to pause for a second and point out, well, the debate is coming to a close in just a couple minutes, but do notice throughout the entire debate that this dude never addresses the point that the Bible teaches child marriage. The Bible has stories of people under 18 getting married, so by his logic, the Bible teaches child marriage then. So it's like, why don't you address that? Like, at no point in this does he ever address that point. You know, the Muslims should have got on him for that. That's one thing I'll criticize him about is, you know, he should have got on him, you know, more about, say, for an example, like he asked him earlier, why is it 18? He should have pressed on him, you know, more to make him give an answer for that. He should have pressed on him more. And also about, you know, how child marriage is in the Bible. He should have pressed on him even more on that. Because once he admits that, well, his whole point goes out the window, because he bases his whole channel, his whole YouTube channel, is based upon the Bible, right? So, once again, it's just, this dude doesn't know what he's talking about, man. He got his ass cut to shreds in this debate, and I'll let the last couple minutes play out. I might pause it again, though.
There's just so much evidence that this is harmful. And we honestly should outlaw this around the world and start helping girls to flourish and live better lives, not forcing them into marriages where they're going to suffer immense harm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go over to Daniel for his 5-minute closing as well. Daniel, the floor is all yours.
Okay, so Mike is talking about, well, for 40-year-olds, older women, they should just ask their medical doctor to make sure it's safe. Well, why can't you say that for children as well? You can ask, you can have minor marriage, and before any consummation of the marriage, you ask the doctor, you have a full physical examination, and then you make sure by the medical professionals that it's physically safe. Then would you be in favor of it? In favor of child marriage? Then would it be morally acceptable? Mike talks about psychological harm. Again, I cited studies showing that the psychological harm is due to a family environment, due to molestation, is due to other kinds of social stigma, and not due to the actual adult-minor relation. Emotional damage as well. Again, the status quo now is one where child marriage is stigmatized, minor marriage is stigmatized. There's no stigma with children fornicating. Why is there psychological damage in marriage if you have like a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old getting married, which Mike considers to be morally unacceptable? Why is that so emotionally damaging? But
yeah, let me pause there. You know, it's funny because, you know, I've even seen people make jokes about, you know, before, like, oh, you know, a 40-year-old man got with, you know, a bad 18-year-old. Right? People say, oh, well, she, you know, the 18-year-old, she was just a horny young woman, right? She was just a horny young woman. But magically, of course, if that same, you know, 40-year-old man got with that woman, say, a week before she was 18, or even a day before she was 18, oh, she was such an innocent child, and he was such a terrible monster that should be, you know, tracked down and hung to death, right? He should be hung for his crimes against such an innocent child. But as soon as she hits 18, oh, she was just a horny young woman that wanted to sleep with an old man. But she was 2 days before 18, well, she was such an innocent young child. And this is how these dumbasses think. Absolutely ridiculous. By the way, if anybody made it to the end of this video Go ahead and put hashtag debate in the comment section if anybody made it to the end.
Two 17-year-olds fornicating is just fine, or two 10-year-olds fornicating is just fine. What about, is it a surprise that there are no medical studies showing the emotional damage that comes with all kinds of sexual promiscuity, that comes with all kinds of behaviors that are socially sanctioned or socially acceptable in society? We don't find those kinds of studies in abundance. Why? Because it's determined by the culture. It's determined by the status quo. He also says that every medical expert agrees with his position. Well, every medical expert now is saying that gender-affirming care for kindergartners is something that's important. And if you prohibit gender-affirming care, then that is psychologically harmful for children, and it causes emotional damage for children. So again, all of these studies that Mike has cited, it just takes a very little bit of analysis to show that they're full of holes, and they don't support the overall contention of the debate on whether child marriage or minor marriage is morally acceptable. Mike also talks about Jesus never condemning boiling cats. Boiling cats wasn't an accepted, widespread practice in the time of Jesus, but child marriage was, and child marriage was sanctioned.
Right. And again, this is a good point. It's like shit, people weren't just going around boiling cats, so of course you're not going to see anything criticizing that in the Bible. Is it wrong to do that? Of course it's wrong to, boil animals to death. But you're not going to see where Christ criticized that because, that's not something that was, going on every day. I mean, did it happen one or two times? I'm sure, some sicko did that, here or there once or twice. But I mean, that's not something that was happening, every day. So, he didn't have any reason to, even address that. However, child marriage, right, people marrying under 18, that's something that happens all the time, especially, 2,000 years ago, but it still happens even in the modern world today. In fact, you can look up the statistic. Out of all the women married in the world today, there was like 800 million women in the world married before the age of 18. Look it up. Right, so out of all the women in the world that are married today, 800 million women got married before the age of 18. Think about that. I'll let him continue.
By the Jewish rabbinic authorities at that time. Nowhere does he condemn that. Nowhere does he even come close to making an explicit statement condemning it. So overall, Mike did not give us a solution for childhood sexuality and all of these children fornicating. He hasn't proposed any outlet for these raging hormones starting from children at age 8 or 9. Did Mike explain how attitudes towards child marriage radically shifted in the last 300 years? No. Did Mike explain why Jesus didn't condemn the child marriage that was rampant in his time? No. Did Mike explain why the Bible never comes close to condemning child marriage and in many cases actually seems to command it? No. Mike has failed on all of these points. Overall, my opponent has refused to answer some of the very basic questions on this topic, and his overall approach is full of inconsistencies. So finally, as a Muslim, I want to conclude by saying that I'm proud of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and everything he did. He was the most moral man.
All right, I'll stop there. That was just my my commentary of this debate. Once again, if you'd like to listen to the whole thing, because I definitely cut, like 45 minutes out, 50 minutes out, you can find the link to the full debate down below. Anybody made it to the end of this video, put hashtag debate down below. And yeah, I got to give credit where it's due. Even though the Muslim went off on a couple points throughout this debate, as I clarified earlier, he clearly took the victory in this debate. Shouldn't I'm I only subscribe to the Bible, but I'll give him credit. Even though he's a Muslim, I'll give him credit. He schooled this Christian in this debate, man. I mean, Christian received an ass whooping in this debate, man. And it was funny because I saw that, what's this cat, Drake, right, aka the Southern Israelite, did a video about this. So I checked it out. I was like, well, shit, I got to do my own reaction to this. I got to do my own commentary to this. So that's what gave me the idea of this, so shout out to Drake. Which hey look, Drake, he got his ass cut to shreds last time I hopped on his stream, man. I mean, that dude clearly don't know what the hell he's talking about. But he did a good commentary on this too. But yeah, I gotta give the victory of this debate to the Muslim Skeptic. I mean, he clearly cut this guy in, 6 ways to Sunday, man. Like, this was a damn embarrassment. This dude made Christianity look pathetic, man. Like, you guys gotta come with better arguments than what you came with, man. That this is a damn embarrassment. But anyway, I'm gonna say shalom.